welcome to a special episode of Call Time. I mentioned that over the interweb, or rather, not the interweb, but our social media channels, that I have a special guest this week. I was trying to make it in time because I was going to have the previous episode as the last episode of the year, but I feel like this is actually more of the episode I could end with, and then I'd probably be able to take a month off, rest, relax, enjoy the holiday season. So joining me today is Jackey Ray Jones, or was it Jackey Jones?
Jackey Neyman Jones.
Jackey Neyman Jones, who played Debbie in Manos, Hands of Fate. So if you actually know the movie mostly by its reputation, or if you are a big Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan, you probably know it by heart, and how that sort of thing came about. But yeah, Jackey, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you. I always ask about how my guests are doing right before I get into the notion of the podcast thing. So yeah, so tell me about, were you, like, did you grow up in a big performing arts family with actors, actresses, or was it just something that just happened to have like like it just happened to just roll off that one day? Oh yeah, by the way, we're gonna be filming a movie one day, or filming something one day, or acting or something, I should say.
Well, my dad, at the time, he was director of the South El Paso Boys Club as his day job, but he was really into theater, and we had a very strong theater in El Paso, Texas. And so my dad was in a lot of plays there at the Festival Theater, and he usually played the lead role. And in this case, they were doing the play Henry IV, and my dad was playing the lead role of Henry IV. And Hal Warren, who wrote, directed, and played the father, Mike, in Manos, Hands of Fate, was in the play. And so Hal Warren, and so he looked around the play, and he looked at all the people involved, people he'd worked with before. You know, it's a tight-knit group. They worked together in different projects. And Hal looked around, and he saw pretty much everything he needed for a recent script that he had written. And so Hal raised some money. Well, first he asked these guys if they would be interested in filming a movie, and then he raised some money, and like 2 months later, they were shooting it.
Oh wow. When, like, did you understand what was going on? It's like, oh, we're making a movie now, or like, I imagine, like, as a kid actor, you had this the notion of, yeah, we're making a movie, but like, did you know like the production stuff that was going around, where I was like, okay, this is the director setting up the scene, he's doing the shots, here's us like getting ready for our scene, like from a sensation from that point, like how did you know it was like, oh, we're actually making a movie here, and rather than something like, especially as a kid actor, or as a kid on the movie, I should say.
Well, my dad was in the theater, as I said, so I was accustomed to being around creative people, and I really enjoyed everything he did. He was also an artist, and worked in many different mediums. So, I was accustomed to being in a very unique family. I mean, we lived in El Paso, Texas, and this is the 60s. We were 3 miles from the Mexican border and the Rio Grande River. And we were the only non-Hispanic family pretty much in my neighborhood or my school. So we were different. I was the kid that the only reason kids friended me was so they could get inside my house to see all the strange things that we had. So, but I knew nothing about filmmaking. None of us did. Again, it's the 60s and it's El Paso, Texas. Hal Warren's dream was to make a film and to highlight the beauty of the Southwest and how welcoming the community was. So he was hoping to bring the film industry to the Southwest, to El Paso.
Hmm.
So when he cast Manos, like it was very low budget,
Oh yeah.
and he had it pretty much, well, he had all the male characters he wanted, and then he went to the local modeling school, and that's where he got all the women, the wives, and the woman who played my mother. And they still needed a kid, and my dad just happened to have one. And so he asked me one day if I wanted to be in a movie that he was doing. And I had no idea what that meant. And I was a shy kid, and I said, I don't know. And he said, well, that's okay, honey. You don't have to. We can just find another little girl. And that was it. I'm like, oh, hell no. No other kids gonna be hanging out with my dad, you know. So that's really how I got in it. Hal took advantage of what was available. I mean, our car was in it.
Yeah.
My mother made the costumes. My dad did all the props. Our dog was in it. The Doberman was our family pet. My great grandmother's quilts on the bed. You know, I mean, just to me, it rather than being a film, it was just more like a friends and family adventure.
Yeah, like a community. I wouldn't say a community project, but it had like a lot of love from the community, and you have a lot of people who it's like the same thing where it's like uh film projects, especially that I've done in the past. Especially if I know the people who are working behind the scenes, i.e., the actors, actresses, all that stuff. You know, sometimes like a great thing about that was that a few years ago I was filming a project for my class, and one of the things was one of the characters had to wear a t-shirt, and it was a t-shirt that I made as best as I could. And my actress, she came up, said, you know, I could probably make something more about this. Could I just give a quick once over? And of course, you know, she gets the t-shirt, looks at it, you know, and then starts getting a scissors, starts cutting it up a little bit, making her own design and whatnot. So yeah, I imagine like when you're doing a small independent project and or a small independent film, you know, small independent film or even a small independent theater project, people who you know, especially if it's like behind the scenes or some of the actors, they all chip in rather than just being like, okay, I'm just gonna think about my lines and think about all that stuff. It's like, no. We got to deal with the sound stages. Like we got to deal with
Right.
we got to deal like, okay, we got to move this desk over here because it, you know, like it's in a good position, but it's not necessarily getting good lighting. So can we move this desk over here? And then, okay, by this time it's like, oh yeah, but yeah, I imagine like doing that for the production went on for like what, 2 weeks, or was it like 3 weeks?
Yeah. No, 2 weeks, about 8 days, nights and weekends, because
Oh,
everybody else, you know, everybody had day jobs.
yeah. So I imagine for like 2 weeks, like everybody chipping in to make sure like everything else was like not only looking around film, is like you're also making a film. So it's like uh the film, like buying the film, especially in the 60s, I imagine that being like a lot of money. So it's like or you know, so and you don't want to burn daylight, and you know, not only that, burn film too, where it's just like you just having like, okay, we don't want everything to mess up everything. It's like nowadays it's like we film, you know, nowadays it's filmed visually, and you know, you can take as many takes as you want, so forth and so on. So I imagine it's like, yeah, I imagine with a small minute time window of like legitimately 2 weeks, and especially with everyone else having like, you know, day jobs and stuff like that too, I imagine it's like, and filming at night too is like, that is even more of a hassle because filming at night, it's like, it's either, and I imagine also filming in the desert is probably even more colder at night, whereas it's like, or depending on where it is.
Yeah. No, I was the middle of summer. It's hot in
Oh,
South Texas. But yeah, I mean, the big problem with filming at night, besides lighting, of course, is we're the moths. And that's one of the jokes with Mystery Science Theater is you can see the moths flying around. There's nothing you can do about it.
yeah. Uh, but yeah, speaking of Mystery Science Theater 3000, I remember reading probably on either maybe Wikipedia or something like that how the film like went unnoticed for a while, or just went unnoticed. Because I'm not sure how, like, as an independent film, especially in the '60s, it would be like, oh, it was made, it was released, and then it got played in the film circus or something like that. And then,
No, it didn't. It showed at the premiere November 15th, 1966. And and none of us had any idea how bad it was. No, it happened so quickly. It was filmed in like June, and it was released in the theater in November. That's a quick turnaround for any
yeah.
film. And in this case, it was shot silent because of the camera they were using that could only shoot 32 seconds.
Oh wow.
And then it was a wind up camera, like the one Filmo 70 that they used in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
So the voices also had to be dubbed. So, you know, it was uh it was quite
Yeah.
interesting. So it showed in the theater for the premiere, and it was so bad, and the audience was actually riffing it back then. And when it was over, everybody just wanted to forget about it. The theater was going to run it for 2 weeks, but it was just so bad they didn't show it again after that first night. And then it basically disappeared. It just disappeared. It didn't have a copyright on it. It just kind of went out. And I learned later that it showed at various drive-in theaters, around mostly West Texas. It'd be one of those movies at the drive-in theater. It's the third movie on horror night, and you play it to get people to go home, And but I looked for it once I became a teenager and I got older. I searched for it. We didn't have a copy. I never saw it again after that night. And then 27 years later, my dad calls me on the phone in 1993 and says, "You'll never believe what I just saw on television." So that's how we found out that it was back in the world. And strangely, it became pretty much an instant hit.
Yeah. I imagine like doing a film and then suddenly people like, we don't want to have this film like released, like widely released because of pacing or people not liking it, that sort of thing. And then suddenly years later it pops up on a show that not only showcases like quote unquote bad movies, but also like rips on them, but also shows like, oh yeah, the filmmakers were having fun with, what have you, with all that stuff. Uh, were you aware of Mystery Science Theater 3000 around the time, or were you just like kind of surprised that, oh, there was a show that actually was filming, filming a riff on the film, but also showing the film on a more national scale and allowing people to go, oh, there's this movie that people haven't really found yet. And suddenly there's like a lot more people wanting to watch this movie now.
I I had heard of Mystery Science Theater, but I hadn't watched it. But my dad's the one that was watching it when Manos came on, and because he was a fan. And so it was his weekend, and he lived on the Oregon coast, and it was a rainy January day, and he was just kind of hanging out, watching TV and Mystery Science Theater, and he started dozing off. He heard some familiar music, opened his eyes, and there he was. But on the screen, but I didn't really know about it until it happened. But since then, I've met all the guys, and Frank and Trace are doing this show next week on Tuesday, December 14th, riffing Manos, and I get to be the special guest. And I just feel so honored to have the opportunity to meet these people and be part of this really great community of people. I mean, in high school, when I was growing up, I was a big fan of Firesign Theater, and my best friend and I, we memorized most of the albums, and we drove everybody crazy with the albums, and that kind of humor reminds me very much of Mystery Science Theater, and the fan base is very close knit and supportive of each other in the same way. So this worked for me perfectly. I love Mystery Science Theater and the fans, and they're definitely my kind of people.
Yeah, it's weird because I grew up in I grew up in the '90s, and I only knew Mystery Science Theater on like reruns on Sci-Fi and the movie that they made, which was and then that was essentially it. I don't remember really much watching reruns of it. I just only remember watching bits and pieces, and primarily the movie. But when I got more into adulthood and stuff like that too, especially over the past, like, say, several years, I've grown more and more uh, accustomed to knowing what Mystery Science Theater 3000 is, especially since Netflix made a great rendition of the show, bringing it back to especially a more brighter, or broader audience, especially with the millions of subscribers that Netflix has. So having a show like that, and then going, oh yeah, this is the type of show I would have been watching probably on a Friday night, with some like what you just said before with your father, like on a Friday night, sitting in a chair, watching something, just laughing about what these talented comedians and writers do for essentially maybe a 90-minute movie, a 2-hour movie, and somehow cutting out, anything that's like in the like commercials and stuff like that to give it a airtime too, especially if yeah, it's like it's definitely one of those things. And one of my great friends, he's a great a great fan of the show too, and it's like his comfort food. It's like when something's
Oh
really,
yeah.
it's like whenever it's like really something is bothering him, he usually just turns to Science Theater 3000, Mystery Science Theater 3000, and just watches a random episode because he knows it by heart. And
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people like that. I know a lot of people like that. That's their comfort place to go, and things are not right in the world, and however way, that's where they go to disconnect from everything else, and to get into something that makes them happy.
now, Manos has been named like one of the worst movies of all time, especially on like IMDb and all that stuff. Now, over the course since its release, there has been like worse movies that have come out on like came out in like theaters, and like in actual theaters, and you know been released on TV, stuff like that too. Especially now that people are starting to, like, people have grown more accustomed to knowing what type of movie it was, do you still think that name should be on like the marquee, or should it be like known as like, we kind of know like what type of movie we're going with here. This is not really bad. This is more along the lines of, here's an hour and 10 minutes of just like mindless fun.
No, I never thought it was the worst movie. I've had people try to, they go, there's worse movies than that. Well, of course there are. I mean, there's a lot worse movies than that. In fact, in high school, I was an extra in a movie that's way worse than Manos. It's called The Curse of Bigfoot. I think Riff Tracks did it, but I mean, I'm in like this little tiny scene, but there's so many bad movies, and not just since then, before then as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, but what I love about this is that it was named that, and it won worst movie ever made two different years for the MST Turkey Day Awards. But people they call it that in a very loving way. It's just so much fun. I'm honored
Yeah.
that it's named that, and I don't know what makes people love it so much. I've watched it a bunch of times myself, but there is something about it, and I think Frank, and I've heard people say it's like your last known photograph, or it's like a train wreck. It's so bad, but you just can't look away, and I'm just honored. I feel like that's the best legacy my dad could ever leave me. I have so much fun with it. And while he was still living, he lived vicariously through me as I went to events and got to talk about it and to do things like write my book. I've made a film, Manos Returns, and I'm working on the Debbie Chronicles now, and I just get to work with so many talented people. The other thing about Manos that just fascinates me is all the projects that have been created from it that are from really talented people. It's like it's inspired this stuff that like myself, I'm a professional artist, and I've done some amazing work. I made a good living raising my children as a single mom, doing interior specialty finishes, plaster techniques, murals, and so on. And so I don't know. I don't know what it is exactly. I think it's the humor. It never would have done anything if it wasn't for Mystery Science Theater. I mean, I give those guys all the credit for bringing it to the world in such a way that allowed people to embrace it the way they do.
I think it's also one of those films where if you watch it on your own, you're kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. But if you're watching with a group of friends, like i.e. with like a Mystery Science Theater 3000, kind of riff on it, but also understand it a bit more. And because of the fan base, it's like, I did not know that they made someone made a fan-made game called Choro. I'm already mispronouncing the name. Is it Choro or is it
Torgo.
Togo? Togo's Revenge. I was like, I did not know.
Yes.
I did not, and that was a game that was made from the basis of another game. So I was like,
yeah. But do you know there's 2 coloring books? There's a comic book. There's trading cards. There was 2 comedy stage productions. There's puppet theater, Manos, The Hands of Felt, which you can find on YouTube. It's really great. There's, what else? I mean, there's so many different things. And then for I wrote a book called Growing Up with Manos, The
Yeah,
Hands
I
of
was about to
Fate.
ask you about
And the long title is How I Was the Child Star of the Worst Movie Ever Made and Lived to Tell the Story. And I'm very proud to say that my book is 5 stars on Amazon. I mean, it's a really good book about a really bad film.
Now, how did the book come about? Because it was just like one day you just decided, you know what, Manos has like accumulated a lot of fandom, and I would love to write about not only my experience on the film, but also the experience I've come to know as an actor coming out of a like this type of film.
Yeah, it came about because Manos disappeared for so many years, and I really thought I would never see it again. And growing up, there were a lot of challenges, and I've always adored my dad, but through different things, we weren't able to see each other for many years, and and then Manos just got bigger and bigger, and it became a way for us to reconnect. And oh, and 27 years it had disappeared. I held on to the memories. Like, I really cherished the memories. I remember telling friends in school stories about this thing that I did with my dad when I was 6 years old. And so they were in my head. And then I met this woman over Facebook, and I was mentioning wanting to write a story, and she's written books and done editing, Laura Mazuka Toops, and she lives in Chicago. And she talked to me about it, and together, she just really got me going. So I just started writing everything I could remember. And then I started doing research, and I found other people that had been in Manos that were still living that aren't now.
Yeah.
Some of them. I reconnected with Diane Marie, who played my mother in Manos, and she's been part of several projects I've done because of our reconnection. And then my dad was still living, and I just did a lot of research, and I was able to fill out the stories based on finding people, and kind of balancing it off, saying, this is what I remember from my perspective. What do you remember about this? And through that, it just came together. I'm working on another book now, and that fills it out even more.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm working on 2 books. My friends tell me, oh God, I consider myself disorganized, but then I realize I'm just doing so many different things at the same time.
I feel you. It's like I have a podcast, but I'm also trying to write screenplays. I'm also trying to write actual stories. Well, not actual.
Right? See?
I'm trying to be a novelist. I'm also trying to be a screenwriter. I'm also trying to be a filmmaker. On top of that, I have a podcast. So I'm like,
Right? I know. That's me. So a documentary in film version, and God, there's just so many stories and people to talk to. And then I want to write a book. I'm working on a book called For the Love of Manos, because over the years I've heard so many stories from people about Manos and their relationships, and just, I mean, that book could really spread out, but
yeah.
or how not to introduce your first date with somebody to Manos if you want to start with MST.
At least wait till you fit the 6th date for that.
Right. Most people suggest not the first date. That's probably not a good idea.
Now, now you mentioned fan projects and stuff like that too. I kind of noticed that over the years, especially with projects that are, uh, for instance, the Friday the 13th franchise, it hasn't had a film since 2009 because of like legal issues and whatnot. But there's been fan projects that's been keeping the idea of Jason alive. There's been a video game, stuff like that too. When it comes to doing fan projects or fan sequels to Manos, do you go as like like a lot of it, like a lot has been taken care of? Not only do they recognize the type of lore or history that the film has, but also making a new movie that goes, oh, it still carries on the humor and yeah, the humor of the movie.
Well, let's see, like the stage production, I've just been really fortunate. Like one of the stage productions was in Portland, and I live just 70 miles from Portland. And I found out about it, and that one was very funny. I mean, it was set up to be a comedy. They had the little Debbie character played by a doll that they made, and the Doberman was made of cardboard and felt and rolled across the stage on little tiny wheels, and he fell over occasionally. It was freaking hilarious and total parody. And they found out, I contacted them and wanted to come to the play, and they got excited and invited me to be part of it. So I got to actually play my own voice from the light and sound booth. It was great. So I got to be the voice of the doll on stage, which was poetic justice, since my voice in the original was dubbed by a middle-aged woman. So now the middle-aged woman gets to actually be Debbie. It was very ironic and cool. And then the puppet theater, Manos, Hands of Felt, is in Seattle, and I found out about that, and I got to go up and see the show. And Rachel Jackson, who created that, actually is one of the producers, writers, and people in Manos Returns. So, and she's very, very talented. But other projects, things that people do, I totally support it. I've been part of a few projects that I'm a little embarrassed about, because of the quality of the project. But I love it. People send me their pictures of their cosplay when they're Torgo or the Master at different events. And it's just become such a big and broad world.
Yeah.
But as far as Manos Returns and the Debbie Chronicles, the things that I've been involved in that are that I feel are very professional, I'm finding it interesting that they're coming out right now when we're in this world of science. We're looking at simulation theory and the Matrix, the glitch in the Matrix. I don't know if you've seen that documentary and things like that. It's like that stuff makes sense to me, but that seems to be that's where we're going with Manos, because in Manos Returns, my character has grown up with this cult, the Master's cult, and now she becomes the Master. She takes over, she's raised to become the leader of this cult, but she's not necessarily she's not a pleasant person because of where she was raised, but all these wives are like, what does she need these wives for? So she's kind of annoyed with them. And then in the Manos Chronicles, it's a whole different character. It's where Debbie escapes the Valley Lodge at a young age, and she's been in hiding all these years, and now she's coming out to work to do good in the world.
Hmm.
So it's a whole different character, and like different universes. So I'm totally open to people's ideas. I love to see people take this core idea and go, well, what if this happened?
Yeah, it's that's the joy of filmmaking too, is that you can always take this core idea and just have your own take on it, because there's like there's literally hundreds of takes on Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, stuff like
Yeah,
that. And these are also public domain characters, so it's like it's easy to say that. But when you aren't the creator of something and you see your film being sequelized to, say, uh, another example of this was, like, I was just watching one of the later Terminator films that was just like made a couple of years ago, Terminator Genesis, and I was like, I kind of remember watching it when it came out, like not really being kind of like, it's an okay movie, but I was rewatching yesterday. And I was like, you know what? This is something special here that kind of like, especially now that it's like, made now it's like a few years later, where it's just like, I understand where the filmmakers were trying to go with it, especially now where it's like, we're kind of like in a world of apps and stuff like that too, where it's just like, if this was like 2015, there's like, they were apps, but there weren't like apps that were, taking the world by storm. Now there are apps that are taking the world by storm now.
yeah,
And then again, with the Matrix Resurrections coming out, it also adds to the fact that, people are coming more along the lines of playing with that idea. So yeah, it's like, but back to my original point, where it's just like the idea of taking a core character or a core plot point for this movie and then making it I love the fact that they made a prequel movie about Torgo and explaining more about the character, and they, as I mentioned before, a video game where he has his revenge.
yeah,
It's it, and of course, it is kind of like, and it ends with on a very odd note where it's just like, yeah, the father shoots the master, and then suddenly is like, you don't know if he has either killed him or something like that, and then it just transitions into the next day, and then we find out that something weird that's going on. It's like people could easily figure out, like, okay, how did this happen, and then play off to that, where it's just like, again, it's like, as a filmmaker, you always have a fun idea of taking an idea that you saw and go, okay, what if this happened?
what
And
if?
and then
Yeah,
and then essentially creating a whole little diversion, excuse me, creating a little diversion timeline where it's just like, this is my interpretation of what happens after this movie. So yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. And so it's really fun to be part of that culture.
Now, right before I forget, now I know this episode is coming out on Friday, and then on the weekend,
Tuesday.
on Tuesday, yeah, on Tuesday, you have the Mads doing the rendition of the Resurrection. Hey, here we go.
Yeah,
The,
restoration.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, what happens when I'm talking about a word that's similar before. The restoration of Manos as a live review. So how did that come about? Especially, yeah, how did that idea come about? Where it's just like, yeah, how did that idea come about?
Well, Chris Gersbeck, who is the producer of the Mads are back, and he does the Mary Jo Peel show as well online. He contacted me and said that the Mads were interested in that they wanted to do, or that they were planning to do Manos for their end of year show. And I listened to a podcast that they did just last couple days ago, where Frank was saying they chose Manos because all the Christmas movies had been done, and they did Santa, one of the Santa movies last year, and that for some reason they decided that Manos would just be a great way to end the year.
Yeah.
And by chance I had just seen Ben Salovey and had dinner with him a few days after Chris contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in being the Q&A guest, because they have a guest after each show for Q&A. And I've met Frank and Trace a couple of times. I introduced them on stage in Chicago about 5 years ago. I mean, we just literally happened to be in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
So I've met them in person, and I've met Joel, and they're just all such, and I met Jonah Ray, and they're just all such really great people. So Chris contacted me and asked me if I'd like to be the guest, and of course I said yes. And through this process, as we've been talking, they've agreed to, so I had dinner with Ben Salovey, and I asked him if they could use the restoration, and he said yes. So we just kind of went back and forth, and they decided that they wanted to show the restoration. So it's going to be it's just evolved. It started off as something really cool, but it just keeps evolving. And so now they're doing the restoration, and they're showing the trailer to my projects. And wow, they're doing a raffle. I think Trace is raffling off his Torgo costumers. There's just they're packing a lot into the evening, and I'm just extremely honored to be part of this show.
Yeah, honestly, after the past year and a half, with a lot of things just being shuffled around because of COVID and stuff like that too, and theaters not really doing much. I'd be just gracious enough to be audience member, and then watching something in the crowd, just like having fun for like 2.5 hours or 3 hours or what have you, and then having to go or raffle too, and then stuff like that too. And so it does feel like a lot of, not only, it's also the end of the year too, where it's just like, it's the end of the year, we might as well do a good little blowout too, where it's just like, we haven't done that, like, yeah, it's the end of the year, we haven't done a good blowout, so yeah, might as well have fun with it and stuff like that too. And Manos, and especially since Manos seems like a fun film to do, not only from a riff view, where it's like, a riff view perspective, but also a nice, and also the new restoration looks amazing and stuff like that too,
Yeah,
where
you can actually see everything.
yeah.
Oh, so by the way, when you're watching it, there's some times there towards the end of the filming of the original Manos, when the crew, the two guys that were the crew, were getting pretty frustrated with Hal. And so they would plant things to see if he was paying attention. So there's inside the house at one point, when my dad is holding up the master's robe, you'll see right below him there a beer bottle. So that was planted by the crew. And then when he lights Torgo's hand on fire, and this was more of a mistake than it wasn't an intentional plant, but the little can of lighter fluid is sitting there at the base of one of the columns as he's holding up the burning hand. So, you know, if you look closely, you can find some pretty cool stuff. And it's a lot easier to see on the restoration.
Yeah, it's like again, I was just watching the Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode last night, and I was like, how did they able to see, how were they able to riff a movie like this when I could barely see with my own eyes, and I have glasses too, whereas it's like, ooh, it's like it, like again, I know it's the 60s, and I know it was the type of technology you had too, where it's just like, but still it's being able to restore a movie from like 40 50, well, not 40 years ago, 50, well, close to 60 years ago. Is this, yeah, close to 60 years ago now.
But yeah, it's about 55 years now.
Yeah, 55 years.
Yeah.
And restoring the negatives to like a HD crisp thing. That's like, like an amazing undertasking, especially since nowadays, you know, people be able to restore, you know, 1930s movies and make it look more cleaner, more like 4K.
Yeah.
Like I kind of doubt that maybe in like 10 years from now, this movie, you know, like there'll be like the Manos 4K edition where it's just like, oh, we now have it. It's like an actual where you can actually see everything in the on screen.
Yeah. Ben actually, by accident, he's a film enthusiast, and he's going to film school, and he bought a box of old films from San Diego on eBay, I believe. And as he was going through it, he found the original work print that went through the camera in 1966 with the cellophane tape for the editing, you know, it's cut and taped together, all yellowed. And he did a Kickstarter, and I believe he raised $46,000 to restore that. And he did it frame by frame, cleaned it up and restored it frame by frame as you would any cherished Hollywood film. And it shows. It's really amazing.
Like literally, I was just seeing one of the frames, I think, because it was promoting the thing on Tuesday, and I saw
the Torgo side by side.
Yeah, I saw how crisp it looked compared to how it looks, you know, previously. I'm like,
isn't that amazing?
Like I was legitimately going, how is this the same movie?
I know, because of the time and money that went into doing that. I mean, it's really, it was meant to be back in the world, I suppose. It was,
yeah.
I mean, when Ben restored that, Hal Warren's son, Joe, decided he should be part of this or something. And he started threatening, and he came after me, and he came after Ben. And anyway, there's a 7-page article in Playboy magazine called The Battle Over the Worst Movie Ever Made. And it was written in 2015. And that's pretty cool. My name is the first words in the article. And it's a 7-page article. So I can honestly say I've been in Playboy magazine.
For the article, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Because, you know, everybody reads it for the articles anyway.
Yes. But I do imagine like you probably had those articles actually framed somewhere. It goes, yes, I actually am in Playboy magazine for the article, where it's just like, it's actually in the article. So
I haven't thought to frame them, but I do have copies.
Yeah.
And Entertainment Weekly, Upworthy, Cracked. I've been interviewed in a lot of pretty cool places.
Well, again, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be interviewed by me, or at least had a nice little conversation with me about this thing, because again,
Yeah,
it's like I when again growing up, I really didn't understand what Manos was. I only heard it as like when I be like IMDb, like, oh, it's be like #1 on like the worst movies of like the bottom 100, #1 Manos, and I never know anything else aside from that and the MST 3K episode. And then over the years, I kind of like grew up like understanding like, oh, there's definitely worse movies over here, but I don't think it probably belongs.
mhm.
Like I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think it belongs on like the worst movies list. Like you could tell like, and again, like what you said before, everything was like a community project. And when you're working with actors who you know and people who you know, especially on a film set, you're obviously doing it with with love and care. It's not
Yeah.
like oh, we're just gonna make a movie for the hell of it and just not know what
No.
we're doing.
And that's one of the things I think that make people love it so much is you can watch it and you can see the earnestness. Everybody was really trying. They were doing the best they could with what they had.
Yeah.
And I think with so many independent films being made, a lot of people can relate to that.
Now, I do have 3 questions that's fairly easy. One, we
Okay.
kind of already mentioned your future projects that are coming out, especially the one on Tuesday. So I won't ask that, but any advice do you have any advice to any like like any independent filmmakers or scriptwriters or what have you who are going into the entertainment industry wanting to make their own movie and sort of like not really like not really set on the type of story they're making, or they have a crew or what have you? Is like, do you have any advice to any inspiring filmmakers?
Gosh, well, I mean, learn all you can if you can connect with people making films that know more than you do. Volunteer your services to be on the crew because the independent filmmakers don't have budgets to pay crews and stuff, and inexperienced people can be very helpful on a set. And I'll tell you, in making the Debbie Chronicles, especially, like I was gone from Thursday through Monday of this weekend. We were filming like 12-hour days. Uh, 2 days were about 12 hours. The third day was probably 8 or 9 hours. It was exhausting. And I was really glad to be on the talent side of it because I could, when I wasn't on camera, on set, I could relax. But it's grueling. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm watching film now I'm watching like a scene where somebody's walking to a bus. And like I started watching American Gods. And I'm looking at this like 4-second shot, and I count 10 different times they had to reset up and move the camera and do something different in just a few seconds. That's a lot of work. So that's one thing people have to understand. To do it right, you really have to have a lot of patience.
yeah.
So I would suggest that people, if they can get on another film set, either as an extra or part of the crew, volunteer some services, that's a hell of a good way to learn.
And my last question is fairly easy. Do you have any social media that you do want to plug?
Yeah, my Etsy store, and that's Etsy, and it's Jackey's Manos. So JACKEYS and then Manos, MANOS. And let's see. Yeah, if you just hashtag my name, Jackey Neyman Jones, I've been learning about hashtags and I'm like, well, there's some pretty cool stuff there. So you can see a lot about what I'm doing. But Jackey Neyman Jones, if you look me up, I'm coming up in a lot of different places.
Yeah, it's
I'm working on a website, but it'll be Jackie's Manos, but
uh,
it's not up and running quite yet.
yeah. We have a website for my we have a website for the show too, and I just made it back in like say early April or something like that. I have yet to really touch up on it because it's like it's still in the early stages. I mean, it's far in the early stages, but I need to get like someone, I might need to get someone to help me on building a website too.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's what I'm doing.
but Miss Neiman Jones, thank you for being a great guest today. Again, you can catch her this Tuesday on the Mads are back with their rendition of the restoration of Manos Hands of Fate. As always, take care, everyone. Please be safe, be well, and have a happy new year.